All right, shalom. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mitch Glazer, president of Chosen People Ministries, and we're helping to sponsor this great event at Dallas Seminary. We also have another version of the conference going on at Southwestern Baptist Seminary in Fort Worth, since the commute's a long commute, and we don't expect people to come back and forth, so we travel. And it's been going really, really well. So this is the gospel in the Middle East. And so we're focusing, of course, on Israel and her neighbors. And so we have a great panel, and I know that you'll learn a lot tonight. This is Michael Zinn. Michael Zinn is a Messianic Jewish guy who lives in Israel and leads the work of Chosen People Ministries in Israel called Bet Sar Shalom, which means the house of the Prince of Peace, from Isaiah chapter 9. And then also, this is Erez Soref, Dr. Erez Soref. And Erez is the director of One for Israel, also called Israel College of the Bible by many of us who can't get used to the new name. And One for Israel is not only a Bible college, but a tremendous ministry that is focusing on bringing the good news of Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah, to Israelis. And then to my right is Tom Doyle, and Tom Doyle is the director of a ministry called Uncharted, and Tom's ministry is to the Middle East and to any place where Christians are being oppressed and suffering, and Tom has a big heart for reaching Israel and the Jewish people and spends a lot of time in Israel. And he's also a Dallas Seminary grad, so he will keep us all theologically straight. And Joel Rosenberg is a well-known author and all-around good guy, father of 4 boys, and a recent immigrant to Israel. And so we're very glad to have Joel here. And most of all, we're glad to have you here. How many of you have traveled from out of town? Okay, that's quite a few. How many of you have traveled from some other town within city far away within Texas? So you didn't count that as out of town. I'm just asking. Yeah, right. And, well, I live in the Holy Land, Brooklyn, New York. So which is why I'm on the panel as the MC. And so we've got some great questions that we're going to look at for almost the next hour and 15 minutes, maybe hour and a half. We'll see how it goes. But somewhere along the line, we're going to hopefully open a time up for you to ask questions as well. And so we're going to begin with sort of a basic question that I think might be on the minds and hearts of some of you. And that is, what's it like to live in Israel, just in general? What's going on in Israel? The politics, the feelings of concern or safety. You can even speak to the economics, brothers, if you would like to. So what's going on in Israel? And then in particular, what's it like living in Israel as a believer in Jesus? And so we're going to begin with our newest Israeli, Joel Rosenberg.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure, because well, we're finding it to be absolutely fascinating. I mean, I'm Jewish on my father's side, not on my mom's side, and so my grandparents on my father's side were Orthodox Jews that escaped out of Russia and made it to the United States. My father's a first-generation American, so the idea that now I'm a first-generation Israeli, we didn't expect to do immigration again, But I've traveled to Israel. I studied in Israel at Tel Aviv University in 1987. So to actually be a citizen there is surreal to me. I've been teaching the prophecies that all Jews will return. Ezekiel 39 says none will be left in the rest of the nations at one point. Obviously, we're not there yet. But the majority of Jews in the world now live in Israel. That's amazing. The United States is the second largest population of Jews. It is challenging. It's exciting. I can't believe I'm there. But, boy, the spiritual warfare is intense. The culture is very feisty. A lot of chutzpah. My wife says every line she gets into the store, somebody at the front of the line is getting an argument over a price, over a this, over that. She'll move over to the next line. That line erupts in a big battle. She moves over to a third line. You cannot get in a line without a battle. Somebody's fighting for something over everything. We're not talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're just talking about getting bread and milk, okay? So that's interesting. But I'm amazed how open it is to share the gospel. People now, part of that I think is because as an American, people say you've made Aliyah from America. I said, yeah. We want to make Aliyah there. Like they believe that this is the promised land, and it has been the freest, safest, most prosperous place for Jews ever, and certainly the most open to the gospel. But so that is intriguing to them. Then if they learn that I'm an author, they find that interesting. Many more than I would have expected have read my novels already or have seen me on television. So that prompts conversations. And then the whole, I'm sorry, what? You're Jewish and you believe in Jesus? And rather than getting punched in the face or spat upon, which, I've anticipated, I've only gotten yelled at one time. And I was so excited that this couple just ripped into me because I thought, finally, I'm in Israel. I mean, where am I? And I'm not saying every Jewish person in Israel is open to the conversation, but we don't find anybody that is not interested in having that conversation, and it seems very organic. I'm not a track hander-outer. I'm not opposed to it, but I find very organic conversations, and I'm loving it. It's even though I'm not a big McDonald's guy, but I'm loving it.
Okay. McDavid's.
No, McDonald's is everywhere there. It's
okay. And Michael Zinn, you're an Israeli from a Russian background, and you emigrated as well. Do most Israelis emigrate? I mean, what percentage are born there, and what percentage are emigrating?
75% born in Israel, 25 emigrated.
Wow. Okay.
You should say that. They can't hear that.
Hold the mic to.
He's just feeding fists.
Just think of ours as a teleprompter. Go ahead.
I was asked a question, just everyone answered but me, Are you all Jewish? Come on.
We're all Jewish, and Tom has already been baptized a Jew.
But the answer is, okay. Thank you. 75%, according to Dr. Saraf, 75% of Israelis are born there, and 25% are immigrants. Maybe close to that. What I know that since year 1990, around 1.4 million people immigrated to Israel from former Soviet Union. And if you add to this people who immigrated in the 70s and then later, probably 25-30%. Yes, that's true. But it's not just about physical immigrants. That's the mind of strangers and immigrants. Jews always for 2,000 years almost got this gene of strangers going from place to place, and we keep it, even been settled in our land. And I know many Israelis, by the way, go outside and they settle. I believe in New York you got 300,000 Israelis, right? Or close to that.
Well, that's next door to me, but there's a lot.
And you got probably 20,000 Jews, Israelis living just in Berlin. So it's all around many immigrants, and I immigrated to Israel, made Aliyah. Just very funny language. You cannot say you immigrated to Israel. You can say just you were brought up to Israel. And the same when you leave Israel, you are not emigrated from Israel. You just go down. That's exactly Yordim. That's just Yordim, the Olim. So that's, excuse me, it's not my language. Just that's God. Everyone who is leaving Israel is just down. And so I moved to Israel, me and my wife, 30 years ago. And since that time, I see tremendous changes in Israel, both in economics and in technology, in even just in immigration and in the growth, of course, of Messianic community. That is tremendous. In my mind, I would not exchange this really promised land to any quasi Brooklyn, Schmooklyn, excuse me, that's good. Huh?
Hey,
Well,
what do you want? I donated my daughter.
Yes. Yeah. You know what? I mean, I can't help. You know, the Israel is just the only. Yeah. I know. Israel, that's the only place. You know, they mentioned in the Old Testament from the Jewish perspective. So yeah, we are very proud, and I believe others too, that live in Israel, and we are very happy to be there in the middle, in the center of the epicenter, following Joel vocabulary. So yes, and yes, we are proud Israelis, immigrants, and Sabras.
Erez, just specifically, it would be really great to also talk about not only what it's like to live in Israel, but what's it like to raise a family in Israel, particularly a family of believers.
Okay, you know how it is. You get a question, but then you answer whatever you want. So first, let me say that the 75% is from the Israeli.
Does this happen with Gentiles? Because I don't.
They don't say to
The
you.
world would
they
be
do it, but,
chaos, you know.
So the 75% of born in Israel and immigrate is from the Israel Central Bureau of Statistics. So it's not me pulling out. You know, again, I was born and raised in Israel. So for me, I lived outside of Israel. I lived in the U.S. for a few years when I was doing some studies, and so that's really my only living experience outside of Israel. But as Michael was saying, as Joel was saying, culture is different than it is here. People will actually tell you to your face, sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely, what they think of you or what you're doing, what you're saying. Israel has experienced a tremendous economic and technological advancement, as Michael's mentioned, that also influences evangelism. Raising a family in Israel, particularly family of believers, as Mitch was suggesting. So the biggest thing is that our kids have always been the only believers in their school, in their kindergarten, in their school. And not that what we've always tried to model to them, and that's kind of who we are, is that we're very, very open with our neighbors, with our families and friends. It was very, very open who we are. Most people respected it enough to they're believers in Jesus. They're a little strange, but they're nice people. They're still our friends. Where it really hurt for the kids, there were not many incidents, but there were some incidents that, particularly my second son, had a very close friend on the 6th grade, and they were playing ping pong in our yard one day, and they started a deep spiritual conversation. And so finally that the friend said, well, I want to believe in Jesus too. It sounds good. I mean, if sins are forgiven. And yes, he went home. He told his Mom, I believe in Jesus, like Daniel, my son. Hallelujah. Then his mom told him, you're never going to see Daniel again. And so she forbade him from coming over to our house anymore. And of course, everybody knew in school, but that was not pleasant for our son. Our family, but again, it was few and far between. It was not the rule. It truly was the exception. That kind of a thing. Very deeply in the Israeli psyche is, I would say, two things. I think maybe the thing that's unique to Israeli Jews is that your son and daughter, after high school, are going to go to the army. So it's a big thing in our society. It's not, as parents, not great pleasure to think about it. It's coming for our kids. Two of my boys have been. My daughter is going soon. One son is in the army, actually. And then, so that's the one thing. The general thing that is characterizing Jews in general, I don't think that's unique to Israel, very deeply ingrained in our psyche is that everyone's against us. And unfortunately, history proves it. And then our kids go to school, we go to school, And then we celebrate, we start with, the school starts, let's say, with Hanukkah in the winter. So the Greeks try to destroy us, Then we continue from Hanukkah to Purim, and then Haman, the Persian Empire, try to destroy us. Then there's Passover, Pharaoh, the Egyptians try to destroy us. Then there's Holocaust Memorial Day that really brings it home, because usually, in my generation at least, we had one of our grandparents, come to class, tell the story. So, Nazi Germany tried to destroy us. And then we go to the army. So our surrounding nations basically try to destroy us. So when I say deeply ingrained, that's really how it is. And important to know, and just related to the discussion in the gospel, and here's where I'll stop, because Mitch is, edging. No, because of you, I forgot what I wanted to say. That was the punchline.
It was a good line.
It was a good line. It'll come back to me, but you go ahead.
I might have some follow-up. Tom, you had a ministry among Holocaust survivors in Israel, and we deeply appreciate that. And it goes to show Romans 11:11, Gentiles making Jewish people jealous by showing that kind of love to people that need so much love. You've had such a powerful witness, and tell us, as you've gotten to know some of the Holocaust survivors, what's their life like? I mean, we're here. How many of you have actually been to Israel? Raise your hand. Okay, very high percentage. We just completed a survey of evangelicals, and you're very strange, all of you. You're against the odds. So we discovered today, Lifeway Research did it, and we're not going to say a lot more about the survey, but just a few numbers here and there. 97% of the evangelicals surveyed had never been to Israel. Okay, so you're very blessed, and that's why you're here tonight, because you're interested in the topic.
Wow.
And so we'd like to, one of the things we'd love to do tonight for you and with you, because we know that when you go on tours, you don't necessarily rub shoulders with everyday Israelis all the time. And that some of you have, but it's not always easy. And so we're going to try and give you a little window into what's going on in Israel through our experience. So, Tom, you're in and out of there so often. What's it like for these Holocaust survivors?
Yeah, well, the first time I went to Israel, I was on the southern steps, and I was visiting with an Orthodox man. He had the hat, the side curls, and I thought I need to get a conversation going. So we were talking. He knew I was from America, and I said, wow, it must be so difficult being surrounded by, 300 million Muslims that are, trying to wipe you out. And he said, well, actually, we're more afraid of you guys than the Muslims. And I said, excuse me? And he said, well, look at Christianity, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust. These are Christian groups. And I realized there was no way I could show him that this was not, Nazis were not Christians. But he said, hey, they sang O Little Town of Bethlehem on Christmas Eve, and they were Lutherans. And it just shocked me. And so then to meet Holocaust survivors that had totally given up a belief in God, it was just too hard for them to fathom there was a God, that they cried out to him. Nothing happened during World War II, even though God was doing a greater miracle coming. But yet for them it's just so disappointing, so agnostic, atheist that you see all over. But one time we were there on a trip, and this was such a blessing. I was there with Tommy, our son. He was leading a team with Josh, and we were with Michael and Maxime, and they were talking about there are some Holocaust survivors in Israel that are so poor that live up around Haifa that they actually have never made the journey to Jerusalem. They haven't been there. That was unfathomable to me. They just haven't had a chance. They haven't been to Yad Vashem. And I remember we had this college group there, and they were saying, how can that be? We get on a plane and go. They haven't. It's depressed, living conditions. And I remember we had a college group, and they passed a baseball hat to take up an offering to bring some of them to come to Jerusalem and stay in a hotel with chosen people and visit Yad Vashem and all that. And I think you guys said it'd be $2,000 or $3,000. The college kids threw in the hat. I thought it was amazing. Raised all the money. It wasn't their money. It was their parents anyway. But at least, they did it. It's a nice gesture. And then we got the pictures of them in Jerusalem, and it's so heartbreaking to see that. So some of them are well known, and speak. Others, you've said this, Michael, all the time, if you just pay attention to them, they will warm up to you. So they can know that you're a believer, but through loving them, you can overcome that bad history that they associate with Christianity. They're going to respond to the love. So difficult life, but we are committed with Chosen People and many, Joel and many working in Israel, that we want to reach them. There's a short window left of Holocaust survivors. Probably in 10 years, there won't be any in Israel left. So,
Thank you, Tom. Joel, you do a lot of work with pastors, and you've lived in a few different spots now in Israel and have been involved with a couple of local congregations. And so would you give us, at least from your perspective, a little bit of an overview of the church in Israel, the Israeli Indigenous National Church? Where are they? What are the leaders like? And what's it like to be a member of a Kehillah, congregation in Israel? And if you can just share some stories, maybe that'd be great.
And how much? So that's a lot of questions in one paragraph, and then he's going to sit. Then he's going to want the microphone back in like 90 seconds. So
I don't mean to rush you.
No.
Take 3 minutes.
Okay. So okay, just some context. 1948, maybe 24 Jewish followers of Jesus in the entire land of Israel. 24. Okay. Today, based on very new research that will be forthcoming, but that Dr. Soroff and his team have put together, we now believe there are 300 congregations, and at the beginning there was 3 or 4 families, and now there's 300 congregations and about 30,000 Jewish believers in Jesus. So that's exciting. That's a 1,000-fold increase, roughly in 70 years. Now, in a land of 6.5 million Jewish people, 30,000, it seems like almost nobody. But again, if you look at the baseline, what God said would happen, that he'd start bringing the Jewish people back, recreate the state, and then begin to breathe life, spiritual life, back into the Jewish people. This is beginning to happen. Now, you look across the range of the 300 congregations, it's eclectic. Right, the Joshua Fund is the ministry that my wife and I founded 11 years ago to essentially to educate, mobilize Christians to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, focusing on the Abrahamic covenant. And and part of what we do is financially invest as well as prayerfully invest in ministries in Israel. Like venture capitalists, we go and identify ministries that, with a little extra encouragement, assistance, financial help, could really begin to have more and more impact. Money doesn't always do that, but sometimes it does, and so we try to do that. That has given us a unique vantage point over the breadth and the depth of the Messianic movement, because unlike a pastor in a given area who's focused on what they're doing and has friends all over the country who are believers and other pastor friends, we actually, have the opportunity. It's not unique, but it's rare that you could go and get to know ministries, their theology, their style, their financial books if they're hoping to have money, how they do what they do. It's given us quite a perspective. I would say that what's exciting is over 70 years, and certainly over since Erez became a believer, where there were maybe 20 or 30 congregations, and he could, as he got to know more believers, you could know almost or every believer in the country. So you can't do that now with 30,000, but you could know many or most of the pastors, and we've gone from a missionary-based pastoral system to increasingly, almost exclusively, a national ministry. Israel College of the Bible, which he runs, was started by foreigners who loved Israel and wanted to encourage the theological development and education. Now, Erez is a Sabra believer. His wife is a fifth generation Messianic believer. I mean, that's amazing that, so that's encouraging. I think there's a lot of challenges across the board. It's a young church. You're saying young? It's 2,000 years old, Joel. Did you read the Bible? Yeah, I know. But, Yeshua said he would build his church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But when you're down to 23, you're getting pretty close to the gates of hell prevailing, right? But just when that group was going to slip under the waves and expire, God has been breathing life back in the way he said he would in the promises of the prophecies. So this is super exciting to me. And I do not look at, if you want to financially, prayerfully invest in big returns, you need to be in China. You need to be working in sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, so forth. But this is beginning to be, this is long-term investing, okay? So some of the challenges are that many of the pastors do not have theological training at all or not much. Now, can you be an effective pastor without it? Yes, you can. But when you're facing every wind of doctrine that's coming through and when you're, so much spiritual warfare, over time a national movement has to have solid theological roots. You also you have no denominations really to speak of in Israel, but you have a wide range from very conservative theological to more Pentecostal and charismatic and everything in between. You do have some heretical movements that sadly have tanked a number of leaders and congregations. But again, that every wind of doctrine blowing through is enormously challenging. And Israel is the epicenter. If you're an Israeli and you go out to teach, people will listen to you because they think, well, you've come from the mothership. Okay, maybe you're healthy and balanced and you know what to say, but sometimes people will listen to you and maybe they shouldn't. So you can evaluate how we do tonight. But I think that we know prophetically that the Spirit will move much more powerfully. We're going to see massive waves of Jews coming into the kingdom. We're seeing it outside of Israel more than inside, but I don't believe we're going to see that level of harvest. Openness, yes. Openness is huge right now. Harvest, not as much until I think at least two things start to happen or those trend lines pick up. One, that there are more pastors, shepherds who are well-grounded and ready to disciple, ready to teach the whole counsel of God, because you cannot sustain a big wave without being able to care for these people. It's like having lots of, a baby boom without any hospitals and, or nurseries or Sunday schools. So, Saturday schools. But anyway, but the other piece I would just say is I think the tensions between Israeli Messianic believers and Palestinian and Arab evangelicals. Can I help you? So okay, I'll wrap on this thought, which is that the tension between the Arab and the Messianic believers is real. I think it's getting better. However, I don't think it's super healthy, and therefore I think ultimately it's hard. It's hard to make the case to our peoples that we know the Prince of Peace if we don't have peace and love and unity between each other, even if we disagree with each other on some core issues. So those are some challenges.
Super, thank you. Erez, if you feel that you can, I know you don't, you're going to be giving a paper on this on Saturday. We've got a full afternoon of Bible studies and lectures here at DTS on Friday afternoon. So tell your friends about it. There's still going to be room. And then Friday night at Fellowship Bible Church, we've got Mekedem, a group from Israel, Todd Agnew, and Joel Rosenberg will be preaching without me interrupting him. And so that should be really great. And then Saturday, over in Fort Worth at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, we're going to have a full slate from like bagels at 8 all the way through to 4:35 in the afternoon, and then we'll have a full evening with Marty Getz and with Joel preaching again. So it's going to be a fantastic weekend. So I hope that many of you will be able to come and bring your friends. And one of those papers that's going to be given on Saturday, Erez is going to share some of the findings of a brand new, first ever survey of Messianic Jews in Israel. And so without giving us your whole paper now, maybe teasing us a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about what the survey uncovered about God's movement among the Jewish people in Israel?
Sure. So, beyond size and numbers and those kind of things, just to get a feel, and we got different kind of answers. We've surveyed almost 300 Jewish believers in the country. The ratio of men, women, the age range and distribution, and the geographical areas, different kind of things were fairly representative compared to general Israeli society. So that was quite interesting. What we've seen, also, of course, there were leaders and so-called laypersons in the congregations. It was very interesting to see a lot of people feel that, a lot of Israeli Messianic Jews feel that they want to influence general society a lot more than we have. A lot of the younger generation, the younger people, feel that biblical theological education is very, very important for them. That education in general is very important for them, and biblical theological education is especially important for their congregational leaders. So I think these are some of the things that we're going to see in coming years, getting even more expanded than they are today. With an enormous, by the way, interestingly enough, among the people that we surveyed, 60% were first-generation believers. That means that they came from families that did not know the Lord, and 40% grew up in Messianic homes. And there were not a lot of differences between them. The most interesting thing was we did a bit of a survey of the history. There were some more descriptive type research efforts done in previous decades, and the biggest struggle was for Israeli Messianic Jews. The biggest struggle was to feel part of Israeli society, because the society kept telling us, you're not one of us, you've crossed a line that's uncrossable, and so on and so on. Well, today it's very different, and particularly among younger people, they feel part and parcel of Israeli society, and they're willing to go places in Israeli society. So I think in that respect, there's God is truly, as I see it, I liken it to almost an explosion, and we're at the very beginning of it. I think it's going to be far-reaching, and it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Great, thank you.
Try to keep the image of exploding churches, I thought, to a minimum over there, but whatever. You're the head.
Explosion in the best sense of the word. Yes, absolutely.
God's dunamis power, no explosions. Michael, tell us about the ministry of Beth Sar Shalom, Chosen People in Israel. What do you guys do, and what are you seeing happening? And then, I would ask these guys to tell us about the incredible movement of God among the Russian immigrants in Israel, and what the Russian language congregations are like. But I'd rather ask you.
Thank you, Mitch. Let's start from the very end. According to my estimation, the probably Russian-speaking congregations, they constitute up to 50% of Israeli believers in general. But the time is changing, since the kids are growing and Hebrew becomes their mother tongue. But traditionally, mentally, and historically, many of them came already being believers of different kind, evangelical, from former Soviet Union, and that influenced a bit, the color of the Israeli Messianic body. As the Beit Sar Shalom, or Chosen People Ministry, Israel, we got numerous whole spectrum of the ministry, but let me start from one of my probably dearest to my heart, minister to the Holocaust survivor. In the Bible, we got this, in my opinion, classical example of pre-evangelism, or even evangelism, Job's friends evangelism, ability to keep silence, listening, not necessarily sharing, but listening. This methodology doesn't bring big numbers, but it does bring souls. And it just very, very, very sensitive. If you really love people, how can it be that you are not ready to listen to them? But even this process of listening does 10 times more than just talking or hooking somebody for the purpose of, okay, I'm going to listen to you, but. There is no buts. If you love people, open your heart, open your ears. And I tell you, when you deal specifically with the Holocaust survivors, the people whose life is just a nightmare, that brings forth unbelievable fruits. I got one friend, he was former host starring in Israeli TV, and after 2 years of the almost, monthly conversations, he came to my office and he told me, I'm still not sure what you believe in. Listen carefully. But he says, if one day I become believer, I want to believe in your God. Eventually he became believer. But it took us 4.5 years. 4.5 years. And I have many examples like that. When the Holocaust survivors, after 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, eventually come to faith. Yes? It's very difficult, for them to overcome their memories. For example, a woman who lost her mom, been shot, and, her mom covered her with the body. So she survived nighttime. She came out of this pit, survived, and then somebody comes to her and says, Jesus loves you. And Jesus is the only way to salvation. And she tells, what do you want to tell me? As my mom now is in hell? I want to see somebody can tell her, yes, she is. So that's very dear ministry and very successful. We are very, very happy. The ministry to soldiers, wow. To the children, to young people. We got Messianic centers in Jerusalem, and they recently opened for the young families in Ramat Gan, that is basically Tel Aviv. Tremendous ministry. We got this Isaiah 53 book written by Mitch Glazer, just the wonderful, superb tool, for sharing with Jewish people and using the modern technology and online Facebook, whatever, it became popular. Just last month, we got 700 people, they're asking, please send us a book, of Isaiah 53. Tremendous openness, and God is so good giving us the tools and the people, and because of you folks, finances and your prayers make this dream possible now in Israel. So 4 distribution centers, when we share goods because of Joshua Foundation, that they're so generous, helping us with all that stuff. Tom's ministry coming and sharing with Holocaust survivors, cooperation and unity brings to the Jewish people wonderful example. Why is that worthy to be inside our body, not outside? And just want to use the opportunity and thank you for your prayers and your support.
I think I'd like to ask myself a question. Why these guys? I think that what you're seeing is sort of a new day in partnership and cooperation. A lot of times we like to almost focus, for some reason, on disunity and people not getting along, and we make jokes about among ourselves, among Jewish culture, because sometimes there are some battles, and we call them Jewish blood feuds. They do happen. But it's quite the opposite here. So it goes like this. All the media that we're doing, millions upon millions of people are watching video testimonies in Hebrew and in English that were produced in a partnership between One for Israel and Chosen People Ministries. But it goes deeper. They were trained by E3 Partners, I Am Second, which was arranged by Tom. And some of it was funded by the Joshua Fund. and it's pretty awesome, to see what the Lord can do when people just agree to work together. And it's just been a fantastic ride. And so there is some tremendous unity between us. And when the body of Messiah works in unity, it's powerful. And yeah, I think it deserves applause. And it's not that we're unopinionated leaders, let me tell you, okay? But the Lord has just done so many good things, and One for Israel also has a wonderful ministry to Holocaust survivors and to and we're all involved with congregations, and there is a lot of unity in the body in Israel, and I don't know, maybe because it's a young church. And we're not too picky about who our friends are. And we need all the support we can get from one another. One of my favorite events every year is the Shavuot, the Pentecost picnic. And thousands of Jewish believers, Israeli believers from all over the country get together at a place right out in the Judean hills, sort of outside of Jerusalem. And, there's music and fun and picnics, and everybody shares food, and it's just a great time. I mean, what better day to celebrate unity than the day of Pentecost, huh? And so there are a lot of wonderful opportunities.
Pentecostals and non-Pentecostals.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I never even thought of that, but that's true. A miracle, Pentecostals and Baptists. And dancing. Think about that one, okay? So there really is a tremendous amount, and it's been a very serious effort. One of the areas, of course, that is always going to be tense, and we have to really face it and talk about it, and so you can pray about it, and that's our relationships with our neighbors, and that includes people in the land. Arabs in the land, Palestinian Israelis, and Palestinians on the, in the territories, and also outside in the Arab world, and so that's why this Gospel in the Middle East conference wants to talk about what God is doing, not just in Israel and among Jewish people, but also how this interacts with those who are Arabs, and particularly those who are Muslims. And so most of us are engaged in this discussion and in this work. And but maybe it would be good to hear from Joel, because that's really within the mission statement of the Joshua Fund, to go ahead and do work to bring the partners together. And Joel, why don't you describe what you guys actually do to train pastors, and how you reach out, and then, just how you see this shaking out right now, and maybe how people can pray.
Well, I appreciate it, and fortunately, it's really part of the DNA of each of these ministries, and that's encouraging. Every conference that Mitch has done that I've been around for, there's been an emphasis on God's love for the neighbors, His love for Arabs, Muslims, Iranians, you name it. And if we, I hope Eris gets a chance to talk about how they're training Arab and Jewish pastors, Arab and Israeli pastors, right there at the Bible College. For us, the Joshua Fund, this is part of our DNA, and we're not only operating in Israel, but we're operating in 5 Arab nations that surround Israel, and of course with the Palestinians also. We're an 80-20 organization. 80% of the funding and work that we do is with Israel, and 20% goes to the neighbors. But we believe it's important to model loving the neighbors, right? Jesus, as the Jewish Messiah, said, love your neighbors. So if you don't consider him a neighbor, you consider him an enemy, well, then you go to the next clause where Jesus says, love your enemies. Oh, come on, Lord, that's everybody. I mean, you're either an Israeli, you're a neighbor, or you're an enemy. Exactly. So in our case, one of the things we have been asked to do, and it's been very encouraging, is have a conference every fall. Actually, it'll be the 6th one will take place next month, called Preach the Word, Shepherd the Flock. These are conferences to take Israeli pastors and their wives, and ministry leaders and their wives, both Jewish and Arabs, away for a few days. We pay for everything. We go to a nice hotel. We're there for, whatever, 3.5 days, whatever it is. And and they don't have any responsibilities, and it's worship music in Hebrew, and then we have an Arabic worship group that comes and leads in Arabic. It's prayer and it's study of the Word. We bring in pastors of small congregations in the United States that have no brand name whatsoever, because you're not coming to hear a specific person. You're coming to be together as the body of Messiah and to be taught the Word and just listen and drink it in and go for a walk with your wife on the beach, or spend time with your friends who you never get to see in a ministry context. I mean, outside of a ministry context, just to relax. So this year, I think we'll have well over 300 pastors and their wives, and so the first year we took them through the book of Titus, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. The next year was James, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Expository preaching and teaching is not a big part of the Israeli ministry culture. We think it's not the only way, but we think it's a very healthy way, because you're going to cover all the topics as the Holy Spirit intended, and we think it's very healthy. So 1 Thessalonians was the next year, and now for the last 2 years we've done 2 tranches of 4 chapters of Acts 1 through 4, 5 through 8. This year will be 9 through 12. Again, if you're dealing with the drama of God birthing his church in the land of Israel from 0 to 60, wow, I mean, why not be an Acts, right? And that's essentially what we're seeing today, and many of the same dynamic challenges. Well, why should we go talk to the Gentiles? Because that's what Jesus said, and that's what Jesus modeled, and I think most of the body is past that. Like, why should we do this? But there are still issues. But not only do we fund, host, organize that conference every fall, but we do the exact same conference a few days later for the Palestinian pastors and ministry leaders and their wives in the West Bank. We've done it every year that we've done this one. The first year, only, I think, 20 couples came. This year, so that's roughly 40 people or so. There happened to be a rocket war at that moment. Everyone told us, all our friends told us, yeah, don't do that. Not this year. It's too dangerous. The last thing you need is a bunch of American evangelicals trooping around the West Bank during a rocket war. But the Holy Spirit said to do it. We did it, and we've been building trust. Okay, I'm the poster child of what you wouldn't want to person you wouldn't want to spend time with if you're a Palestinian evangelical. I worked for Netanyahu. I'm a Zionist, now a citizen of Israel. Dispensationalism is probably the closest form of that I would describe. I don't use the term, but okay. Why would a Palestinian evangelical? Why would I want to spend time with Joel? Well, if I think that Joel and his team are here only to serve me, to love me, to bless me, and they won't talk about politics, that could be useful. And so now that's what's been happening. And we've really built some wonderful relationships. This year we expect more than 120 to come to the conference. I mean, we're now in the 95 to 97% of all Palestinian evangelical pastors and ministry leaders that you could have are coming. You just have a few notable standouts. Okay, if they don't feel comfortable, then that's fine. This is just a way to encourage and bless and cross-pollinate as God shows mercy. So that's what we're doing in the land. I don't want to go beyond
Tom, why
that.
don't you follow up, because you have a pretty active ministry among Palestinians and outside.
Sure.
And maybe you could tell us some stories of Palestinian believers, Palestinians who have come to faith, and maybe how they feel about Israel.
In Gaza. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I was a pastor 20 years and wasn't interested in missions, but God called us to be missionaries. We thought we would be working with the Jews, but 9/11 happened as we're raising support. A couple of months later, we go over to Israel. So really, this is kind of my first day on the job, and we're going into the Gaza Strip. Okay. So we're there. I was reading on the airplane Voice of the Martyrs, and it said that probably the most dangerous place for Christians now was in the Gaza Strip. And I thought, why didn't I get that a week ago? I'm reading it on the plane. So we go in and meet a new believer, Muslim background believer, Hussein. And right off the bat, he says, it's Friday, the Muslims are praying. Let's go down to Yasser Arafat's mosque and share the gospel with Muslims coming out of the mosque. So we went down. And I didn't know anything. I was wearing shorts. I mean, I didn't know any. I was an idiot. And, yeah, really. And, but then we started meeting Muslims as they came out, and they were talking to us. And they were interested in what's this, American doing here and that. And so we're talking. And finally, Hussein pulls me back and whispers in my ear. He goes, hey, by the way, what we're doing is illegal. We could get arrested for this. But really, everybody should be arrested at least once for sharing their faith, don't you think? So, okay. So we went on about 10 minutes, and it was going good. But then all of a sudden, the clerics came. Long beards, skull caps, white dish dashes. They got angry. They had their Qurans out. Here's the Jewish version. And they had the Qurans out, and they're angry, and they're yelling, and they're pointing, and we can feel this circle around us. And Hussein pulled me back, and he said, this is not going well. They could hurt us, and they might even try to kill us, but I'm ready to die for Jesus. And you're a missionary. You're ready to die for Jesus, right? And I said, yes. I mean, do you mean like right now? Am I right? And that was the first day on the job. But look at that. He stayed there. I got to go on a plane and leave. He stayed there trying to reach people. Here's the amazing thing. Pray for Muslims to come to faith in Christ, because when they do, they are dynamic, and most of the times they do not hate Israel. That comes out of them. In fact, we have a picture. Can we show the tattoo picture? This is one of our guys that we work with. E3 Partners now works with Uncharted. He is a former Muslim from the Gaza Strip. He has the Hebrew Shema tattooed on his arm. So we tell him not to wear a muscle shirt in Ramallah, or some of these places where someone might see that he would be killed. But he loves Israel, reaching Muslims, reaching Jewish people, all underground. But he said God just showed me in the scripture we were not giving the luxury to hate our enemies. So I had to confess that I hated Israel, hated Jews. God took it away, replaced it with a love. He's learning Hebrew. He is sharing with Jewish people. He shares with Muslim people. So that's the answer to the strife in the Middle East. It's Jesus. And when he, redeems us, everything changes. So.
Okay, so let me just get that straight again. You're very simplistic, Tom. You're saying that Jesus is the answer to the peace.
Right. That's right.
It's a very simple
Can I
answer.
show you one more picture? If I go really quick.
Sure.
Okay, all right. One more picture. Can we see this? You guys remember Gilad Shalit that was captured by the Israelis? And do you remember by Hamas in Gaza? They pulled him in the tunnel. He was there 5.5 years. Israel traded 23 Palestinian prisoners for him, which sounded insane, but Israel had their reasons to do it. And anyway, we were doing a medical clinic in the West Bank. And Tommy, who's here, met this gentleman on the left, and he said, my uncle wants to meet you. He's kind of famous. And he said, well, why is he famous? He's one of the 1,000 prisoners that was let go for Gilad Shalit. He had served 23 years. He had killed, I think, 15 people, had a life sentence. Anyway, we go. He wants us to come to his house. We got a chance to visit. We found out immediately he's a human being. We all believe that Jesus is capable of saving anyone, right? Even terrorists. And so we had tea with the terrorists and cookies and all that, and he wanted us to pray. There is an opening there. This is what we need to see happen. The hard guys come to faith in Christ. His name is Mohammed. He's right in the middle there. You can see Tommy next to him with the ISIS-style beard there. Maybe that's why we got the invitation. I don't know. But pray for Mohammed. He was interested in spiritual things, wanted us to pray for him. So when you hear stuff on the West Bank, pray for Mohammed. Actually, that covers about half the West Bank. But anyway, so pray for him. God will know which one. That's right. Yeah, half of the building.
I have an Arab believer leader friend. He says if you pray for Muhammad to come to Jesus and you pray that every morning, you are covering about 500 million people. Right. So add in a Fatima and an Ali, and you pretty much you're doing good, and you should. I do that.
You got it.
All righty, Erez, we're excited about some of the programs that you have at Israel College of the Bible, One for Israel, where you have opportunities to train both Israeli and Arab pastors and future pastors. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, just to couch it in a bit of context, as Joel mentioned earlier, the Bible college that we're privileged to run in Israel was started by missionaries. It was something that's unusually happened. I mean, the vision was to train Israelis, but those missionaries, well-meaning, did not speak Hebrew, did not have a permanent status, and so eventually, about 15 years ago, they've practically given us that beginning, and as local believers. So, as a bunch of native Israelis, you know, their vision was to reach or to train Jewish people for life and ministry, and so that's how we began 15 years ago. From that point, very quickly, when there was a bunch of us that were local Israelis, interesting things started to happen. Our Arab brothers and sisters started coming because Arab people in Israel, and actually many Palestinians as well, speak good Hebrew. And so all of a sudden, our Arab brothers and sisters started coming. And that was interesting. We were not sure what to do with that at first, but we were very happy about it. And what we saw that this dynamic between Jews and Arabs, by the way, the Jews and the Arabs, we call each other cousins. Now, our family feud runs pretty deep, one has to say, 4,000 years kind of thing. But, and here's the good news, kind of the summary that Mitch and Tom were talking about. In the Messiah, we found that the Jews and the Arabs, we love each other and we complement each other. And so now we're at the place where about a third of our student body are actually Arabs, some of them Palestinians, some of them come from the Gaza Strip, believe it or not, and 2/3 are Messianic Jews. We also have a small but very vibrant group of international students. But as things go on, we get up in the morning to tell our people about the Lord. And as Mitch mentioned earlier, one of the things we do, we cooperate with Chosen People Ministry in sharing the gospel, blowing the trumpet to Jewish people in English through this, and in Hebrew through this. So that's really the big thing that we do. And all of a sudden, our Arab brothers are coming to us and are saying, help us do that in Arabic as well. And so we started doing that in Arabic, with some of our graduates and so on. The program that is specifically mentioned, that it was a tremendous blessing, is, the church in Israel is very young. So like a lot of other developing or churches that are a developing type of movement of followers of the Messiah, many of our senior pastors never had any training or had very, very little training. They first became pastors and, sometimes 20, 25 years later, they seek training. And we've offered them that training because we're the only ones that are doing it in Israel formally. And they were kind of shy. I mean, they had their kids and young people from the congregation. So we decided to do a special program only for pastors. And there were 44 guys that did that. We cooperated on that one with the Joshua Fund. They've invested. We're part of the venture capital. We're one of the startups. And that program was absolutely amazing because, those senior pastors, some of them are in the same city or in the same region. Israel is the size of New Jersey, to give it context. And yet a lot of them did not know each other. And so that was, over the course of a year or two, depending on the kind of program, they got to really know each other personally. And the result has been that many of them started to share pulpits, started to do congregational events together. And so that really filtered from the leadership, is filtering from the leadership to the people. And it's, again, in our region, it's a tremendous testimony. I'll finish with a story. A few years ago, 7 years ago, we bought a campus, the campus that we currently are using. And during the renovation, there was a group of Arab electricians that were doing their work here. So I'm walking about, and they see me, when they look at me, when they hear the way I speak Hebrew, they realize I'm Jewish. So I come to them and say, oh, you're here, I'm the boss, because it's not mine, but in their view, I'm the boss. So they call me in, come have coffee with us. So I'm coming to have coffee. Well, then the guy comes and he gives everybody cigarettes, and I say, thank you, I stopped smoking, 25 years ago. He says, really? You stopped smoking? How'd you do it? I said, well, you know, I've become a follower of Jesus, and when I did, I asked God to take the desire to smoke away from me, and I stopped smoking, you know, just like that, one day. It was not hard. He kind of looked at me in a strange look, and he's like, you're a Jew, and why are you talking about Jesus? He says, yeah, you know, in 1 Corinthians it says that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. He's like, you're a Jew, what is this? I mean, some of them were nominal Christians, so they couldn't understand it. So here I was, you know, a group of nominal Christians and Muslim Arabs are asking me to tell them about Jesus. So, you know, it was a great half hour.
For Joel, how easy or difficult was your aliyah process? And also, in light of what Erez said, are there believers in the bureaucracy, in the government, since this is a desire of Messianics wanting to be influencing society?
Well, the second one, I personally don't know of believers working in higher levels of government. If they're there, they're just unknown to me, but they may be there. It would be very, very challenging at this point. Israel has to be one of the only parliaments in the entire world, certainly outside the Muslim world. But even in the Muslim world, there are, what I was going to say was, without a follower of Jesus somewhere in the parliament. I think even in Jordan there are believers who are serving in the parliament, and in Egypt there are. So it's kind of interesting. But look, our Aliyah story, just to keep it totally concise, is not illustrative of it was just so crazy easy that it's actually, I think, frustrating and depressing people who think, wow, well, that was easy. I can't explain it. If the Lord wants you there, he opens a door. If he doesn't want you there or there yet, he keeps the door closed, and no matter how much you bang your head against it, it's just not going to open. But you have to just keep waiting on the Lord, and if he will do it when he wants to do it. In our case, it's because, humanly speaking, I got in because my mother isn't Jewish. If your mother is Jewish, then you are under Jewish religious law, halakhic law, you are Jewish. Okay, so you have an automatic right to return. However, and that's the Hebrew word I'll teach you, aval, however, or but. That will be the title of my memoir with my wife about our immigration process someday, because no matter what they tell you, there's always an aval after it. They'll explain, they'll paint the most beautiful picture. Literally, we're in the immigration office. Once we've gotten our citizenship, let me just jump ahead, and they give you an absorption counselor. Okay, now you're a citizen. Let us show you what you do. And the guy had a poster on his wall of all these thorn bushes and dust and all that. That says, "We never promised you a rose garden." This is their entrance. But once you get, that's not on the brochure when you're trying to get in. But once you're there, well, okay, we never told you it was going to be good. Okay. Anyway, so if your mother is Jewish, and then you have an automatic right to return, aval, not if you believe in Jesus. Because now you've converted away from Judaism. So you're off the tribe, you're off the team, and you can't get in. Now, in my case, my mother's provably not Jewish, right? Baptized as Catholic as a little girl, we have the certificate. Okay, so if your father's side is Jewish, and you can prove it, and your mother is provably not, then you never were really, really Jewish. You weren't halakhically Jewish. Aval, there's a second provision in the law. You are Jewish enough that Hitler would have killed you. And therefore, you do have a right to return. And no matter what you believe, even if it's Jesus, it really doesn't matter because you couldn't have left a team that you were never really on. Okay, so that's me. Now, even still, our lawyer said, to be honest, Joel, that you fit black letter law in that provision. However, aval, oh my gosh, it's every sentence, but I won't say it every time. Aval? I'll say it this time. So they said, you will get in, but you will be denied. Somebody will get your application, Google you, and go, I don't think so. No. And that will be illegal, and we will litigate it, and it will go to the Supreme Court, and you will win. But don't hold your breath. It'll be 3 to 4 years. Aval. 2 months later, we got our citizenship. So I can't explain that, except this was the time. God wanted us there. And we're excited. We're thrilled. I just can't believe it. I am a kid in a candy store, even with all the challenges. And there are many. But I'm thrilled.
Okay. Well, that's sure encouraging to everybody. Aval, I just,
That God can do anything, and when He's ready for you to be there, you'll be there. I mean,
There you go.
that's the key. You have the sovereignty of God is the central issue there, and you cannot feel discouraged if God hasn't opened that door yet, and act like He doesn't care for you or love you. I know that's how it feels, but that's not the reality. So we have to work our way through.
all right. Next question. Sure.
Take that away.
Thank you. This is really good. The headlines today in both the conservative and liberal media are about the Iran nuclear deal. And I'm wondering if the sentiment in our fellow believers, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Messianic or Arab believers in Israel, is it different to the larger Israel population? What is their perception of this, given our title tonight, The Future?
Michael? The question is, how do Israelis generally feel about the Iran deal? And then secondly, is there any difference between the way believers feel about the Iran deal and the average Israeli feels about the Iran deal? Correct? Okay. Do you want to know what the Iran deal is?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm expert in that, you know.
He's a nuclear engineer, so I'm sorry, no. Just a regular
I
engineer.
learned a lot of things about myself this evening.
Of
Should
all,
be prophetical. Well, yeah. It's a Obama-related issue. Excuse me for that. Obama was the last popular president in Israel, particularly and partially, if you want, because of this Iranian deal. The least popular, yes, yeah, that's it. The least. Well, but you understand what I meant, and them understood too. You know, why are you laughing? Just I can start speak Hebrew, and I will be laughing, and you will be sitting, you know, so, if you want it. Anyhow, Iran is the enemy. I mean, it's very, very difficult, you know, to distinguish between the leaders and the people who support their leaders. And we do understand as a people that, you know, the leadership is maybe not so popular among certain group of Iranian, but as of today, the Israelis see Iran as the enemy, and this deal is a very bad deal, just the way we read it. I mean, generally, Israeli public. I am not sure that Messianic community looks at this deal different way. I am pretty sure that, you see, Messianic community, as Aries mentioned, they really want, not by all, you know, any praise, but they really want to be, and they feel they are part of Jewish people. That's the point. Because we are facing, you know, a situation that very replacement theology, they claim us, you know, not Jews anymore since you become Christians. But we're really Jews, and we are Israelis. And as the part of people of Israel, we got this enemy that would really just kill us. Let's just call the things by the names. So I'm not sure the most of Messianic community is different in this perspective from the general Israeli public. While speaking about Arab Christians, I would be, you know, probably hypocrite if I say that everything is perfectly good in our relationship for the very simple reasons. Listen, they are part of the Arab people, and we are not. And the history and reality is of such that our children, my children, Ariel's children, they serve in IDF. And the role of IDF, we want or not, is to kill the enemies of Israel. Meaning what? The relatives of the Christian people, the dear brothers and sisters. So it's not so simple. So I believe among some Arab Christians, they are looking a bit different on Iran that we do. But bottom line, yeah, I believe we're very critical about the deal with Iran, and we are very, very pessimistic about the future of if it goes that way, unless God is really making revival in the big events among Muslims around the world.
Erez, did you discover anything in your survey about the political beliefs of Messianic Jews in Israel that might add something to this at all, or?
No, not much. I mean, the general tendency of Messianic Jews in Israel is a very similar inclination and distribution as the general population. So
Well,
there's yes.
that's important.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
It's like the general population. And I would answer, if I would be the first person to answer you, I would say, does American evangelicals feel different than the general American population about North Korea? The Brooklyn Jewish processing. Hold
I'm
on.
trying, Well, speaking on behalf of all the evangelicals, I don't know. I don't know. Tom has something to share. Quick.
Oh, yes. Just as you're praying about that situation with Iran and the nukes and everything that's happening, just remember it is also the nation that has the fastest growing church per capita in the world. And in 1979, the Ayatollah said, we will squash the church. We'll put it out of existence. And, when we're crushed as believers, we get stronger. It's like hitting your fist in water. It sprays everywhere. So I think God takes that personally. And today, fastest growing church per capita in the world in Iran. What a paradox. Most dangerous, but one of the most dangerous. Fastest growing church. We've got to pray for them.
And even more so.
Yes.
How many Iranians are there in Israel who grew up speaking Farsi?
There are several tens of thousands at least. I'm not exactly
lots.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, there's probably
Iranian Jews. Yeah.
Iranian Jews. There's probably about 100,000 Iranian Jews probably in Israel, and there's probably 150,000 in Los Angeles and in New York and in London. So pray for this. This is really important. Chosen People Ministries has just translated the Isaiah 53 Explained evangelistic book into Farsi. Secondly, we have created a Farsi evangelistic Isaiah 53 website, and we're in the process of creating Isaiah 53 Farsi Facebook ads, and we're going to be directing them to Israel, Los Angeles, we can do that, and to England, and that's going to get to Iran as well. But there's only about 20 or 30,000 Iranian Jews left in Iran. And so just pray. We're about to launch this. Abe, when are we launching? This year. Okay? So 2017, we'll be launching. So pray, because it is they are one of the most unreached Jewish people groups in the world. And so we're going to try and reach them for the Lord. And Joel is going to
Can I add something in there?
finish this up.
Well, okay. So I totally agree with my brothers and Tom in particular here that Israel's worst enemy is seeing the power of the Holy Spirit moving. More Iranian Shia Muslims are leaving Islam and coming to faith in Jesus Christ, way more than Jews. Okay, so what is happening here, Lord? There's a prophecy in Jeremiah 49 that God says, yes, he's going to judge Iran, but then he says he will restore their fortunes, and it says he's going to move his throne there. You're like, throne? Well, Lord, I thought you're moving it to Jerusalem. So something spiritual is happening in Iran, and it's going to get better, but you're going to have two dynamics at once. You're going to have Iran is going to grow darker and become more threatening, and we see in Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Jeremiah 49, the threat Iran will pose and the judgment that will come upon them for that. But in that, God is also going to do this great harvest, and it's already underway. So that's one thing. Second thing, geopolitically, so one respectful disagreement with Michael on this, which is I find a sea change going on in the Sunni Arab world, and even among Christians who live in the Sunni Arab world. Okay, it's not 100%, I'm not saying that, but when President Obama, again, not trying to make a partisan issue, but just when he withdrew forces from Iraq in 2011 and gave a general view that we're done with the Middle East, we're withdrawing, this gave rise or accelerated the rise of two forces: the Iranian radical apocalyptic aggression and the Islamic State, right? ISIS. The two apocalyptic forces, one Shia, one Sunni. The reason this is important is because with American withdrawal, and we're sort of done with that region by and large, and the rise of these two existential threats, not just to Israel, but to the Sunni Arabs began to recalculate who is our enemy and who are our friends. And what you've seen is, with the feeling of abandonment. Now, don't get me a big fight of whether Obama did the right or wrong. I'm not getting into that. My point is the feeling of a Saudi, an Egyptian, a Jordanian, a Gulf Emirati was, we're on our own. And Iran is huge and going nuclear. ISIS is apocalyptic and genocidal. Who are our allies if we really had to go fight them? Israel. And so what you're watching is behind the scenes, under the radar, but starting to pop up above the waterline, let's say, are the relationships going on between the Sunni Arabs and Israel. I'll give you two super fast examples. One, the king of Jordan reads one of my novels, which is about ISIS trying to overthrow him personally. He's a named character in the book, and overthrow his kingdom and assassinate him. Now, that's risky. You're Jewish, you're a Zionist, you're an evangelical, you're an Israeli citizen. You name King Abdullah in a novel about people trying to kill him. Don't expect to get invited back into the kingdom. You could get banned. However, aval, I don't know what the Arabic is for aval, but aval, last spring, the king invites my wife and me to come visit him for 5 days. And him and his generals to show us basically how he's making sure that my novels never come true. And there are many prophecies about the future of Jordan. It doesn't go well for Jordan. And so those are important conversations to have with the Jordanian Christian leadership and political leadership. But that was just amazing to be sitting in a palace with a Muslim monarch who's a direct descendant of Muhammad, talking about prophecy, talking about geopolitics, talking about Israel. This is surreal. And if that weren't surreal enough, in April, I had the opportunity in Washington to be invited to meet with President El-Sisi of Egypt. When it wasn't just me, there were 60 Middle East leaders and Jewish leaders were in the room. When it was over, I assumed he and his entourage would leave right away, but he didn't. He stayed to chat. So, having the chutzpah of, being a new Israeli, I had it before I became an Israeli, but I think that was on the. Do you have chutzpah? Okay, you can come in. So I moved immediately to, I want to meet the president of Egypt, so he's not perfect, but I'm happy of him over the Muslim Brotherhood. So I get a chance to meet him, and I thank him for the fight he's taking on with radical Islam, of telling the Islamic leaders of his country, you've got to reform Islam or you're all going to burn in hell. But that's what he said. You're also going to face the day of judgment, is what he said. I said, I appreciate your reaching out. You're reaching out to Jewish leaders, as you're doing today. You're reaching out to Coptic Orthodox leaders. You're reaching out to Catholic leaders. The Pope's coming next month. This is impressive. He said, well, thank you. We're trying to, this is the new Egypt. I said, have you met with any evangelical leaders? He said, well, no. I said, well, I'm not being critical. We probably haven't asked you, to come. Would you be interested if I, for example, brought a delegation of evangelical Christian leaders to meet with you? He just lit up. He was absolutely excited about that. We talked about it. The foreign minister was standing there. The ambassador was standing there. And the chief of staff of his office said, set it up with them. Joel, you are most welcome. I want you to bring a delegation. I flew home. We had Passover at Erez's house. He's my next door neighbor. So our families are together, a few other friends, and I'm telling them the story, and I'm saying, now just think about this. You're an Israeli Jewish believer in Jesus who gets a chance to meet the leader of Egypt on the eve of Passover, and you say, let my people come. Okay? And he says yes? Okay, so this trip is happening, Lord willing, next month. This is not normal. And I only give my own personal anecdote to say there are some leaders in the Arab world. Now, these are the two that have treaties with Israel, right? So it's not like they're starting from scratch. But they are reaching out to evangelicals. They see, we evangelicals, we all have our flaws, we get that. But they see that possibly evangelicals have clout in America, and I'm not afraid to leverage that to, then let's build a friendship. Let's build a relationship. We want to understand you. We want you to understand us. And I'm getting invited to Bahrain. I know friends that are getting invited to other key countries in the region. Something is happening. I don't want to get Pollyannish, but I'll close with this thought. Many evangelicals, and it comes partly from our dispensational eschatology, feel that the only peace that can come in the region is from the Antichrist, right? Well, we know that will happen, but the Antichrist didn't sign the Camp David Accords or the peace treaty with Jordan. So we have to hold out the possibility. While we can be skeptics and we don't want to, especially Israelis, we've got hair trigger margins. We can't just give stuff away, for nothing. So I'm not talking about a specific plan, but I'm just saying something is happening. And I think we as evangelicals, Messianics, and others need to love our neighbors, our Muslim neighbors, as well as our Arab Christian neighbors, and realize that there's a sense of fear. The Egyptians feel fear. They've got Libya blowing up to their west. They've got Sinai filled with terrorism blowing up to their east. They've got Muslim Brotherhood terrorists blowing up churches and mosques and so forth. Inside, this is a very dangerous environment, and they're terrified. And they want strong leadership, and they want friends in the world. And I would just quote A.W. Tozer as we finish. A scared world needs a fearless church. And we need to be that to our own people, and we need to be that with our neighbors. Who knows what doors he'll open and close, but we need to try to be a light to the nations, which is really what we were supposed to do and be anyway.
Well, thank you. Can we hear it for the panel?